Hello, I'm Reverend Dr. Horace F. Whitaker Jr., and thank you for joining us here at the Thoughts for Living podcast. Today, we hope that you will enjoy the content that we've worked hard to provide for you. Here's this week's episode. Hello, and welcome again to the Thoughts for Living podcast. We're glad that you've taken out of your time to join us here at the podcast on September the 3rd, 2022. We are again reading from our noted theologian, Dr. James H. Cone, A Black Theology of Liberation. Before we begin this episode, we would ask you again, please, if you find this content useful, click on the subscribe button below. Also, you can go to thoughtsforliving.com, where you can download music that's about $1.25 US. Also, at thoughtsforliving.com, you can find other information, other casts that would help you to clarify or to do more research around the topics that we are engaged in. And thank you in advance for your support. We want to get back to our text written by the father of Black liberation theology, the late, great Reverend Dr. James H. Cone. And we're reading now from part 3, the section entitled White Social and Political Power. We will begin from where we left off in the previous episode. Realizing that white racism is an insanity comparable to Nazism, Black theology seeks to articulate a theological ethos consistent with the Black revolutionary struggle. Realizing that white racism is an insanity comparable to Nazism, Black theology seeks to articulate a theological ethos consistent with the Black revolutionary struggle. Blacks know that there is only one possible authentic existence in this society, and that is to force a radical, revolutionary confrontation with the structures of white power by saying yes to the essence of their Blackness. The role of Black theology is to tell Blacks to focus on their own self-determination as a community by preparing to do anything the community believes necessary for its existence. To be human in a condition of social oppression involves affirming that which the oppressor regards as degrading. In a world in which the oppressor defines right in terms of whiteness, humanity means an unqualified identification with Blackness. Black, therefore, is beautiful. Oppressors have made it ugly. We glorify it because they despise it. We love it because they hate it. It is the Black way of saying, to hell with your stinking white society and its middle-class ideas about the world. I will have no part in it. unquote. The white view of black humanity also has political ramifications. That is why so much emphasis has been placed on law and order. Blacks live in a society in which blackness means criminality, and thus law and order means get blackie. To live, to stay out of jail, blacks are required to obey laws of humiliation. Law and order is nothing but an emphasis on the stabilization of the status quo, which means telling blacks they cannot be black and telling whites that if they have the moral and political right to see to it that black persons stay in their place. Conversely, the development of black power means that the black community will define its own place, its own way of behaving in the world, regardless of the consequences to the white society. We have reached our limit of tolerance, and it means death with dignity or life with humiliation. Let me reread that. We have reached our limit of tolerance, and if it means death with dignity or life with humiliation, we will choose the former. And if that is the choice, we will take some honkies with us. What is to be hoped is that there can be a measure of existence in dignity in this society for blacks so that we do not have to prove that we have reached the limits of suffering. The person in political power is a strange creature, and it is very easy for such one to believe that human dignity has no real meaning. In Andre Malraux's Man's Fate, Koenig, chief of Chiang Kai-shek's police, illustrates the inability of the man in political power to understand the condition of the oppressed. Intrigued by Caillou's participation in the Shanghai insurrection, Koenig asked his prisoner, "I have been told that you are communists through dignity. Is that true?" Keogh replies, "I think that communism will make dignity possible for those with whom I am fighting." But Koenig asks, "What do you call dignity?" "It doesn't mean anything." "The opposite of humiliation," says Keogh. "When one comes from where I come from, that means something. Because oppressors do not come from the land of the oppressed, they do not have to attach any meaning to the demands of the oppressed." We can conclude, then, that survival is a way of life for the black community. Black theology is a theology of survival because it seeks to interpret the theological significance of the being of a community whose existence is threatened by the power of non-being. We are seeking meaning in a world permeated with philosophical and theological absurdities where hope is non-existent. In existential philosophy, the absurd is that which is meaningless. Thus, man's existence is absurd because his contingency finds no external justification. His projects are absurd because they are directed toward an unattainable goal. End quote. This is certainly the feeling of blacks as they seek to make sense out of their existence in a white society. What can we say to a community whose suffering and humiliation is beyond rational explication? The black condition is inflicted by the white condition, and there is no rational explanation for it. Speaking to the black condition, characterized by existential absurdities, black theology rejects the tendency of classic Christianity to appeal to divine providence. To suggest that black suffering is consistent with the knowledge and the will of God, and that in the end everything will happen for the good of those who love God, is unacceptable to blacks. The eschatological promise of a distant future heaven is insufficient to account for the earthly pain of black suffering. We cannot accept a God who inflicts or tolerates black suffering for some inscrutable purpose. Black theology also rejects those who counsel blacks to accept the limits which this society places on them, for it is tantamount to suicide. The existential philosophy, suicide, is the ultimate expression of despair. If we accept white definitions of blackness, we destroy ourselves. Black theology, responding to the black condition, takes on the character of rebellion against things that are. In the writings of Camus, the rebel is the one who refuses to accept the absurd conditions of things, but fights against them in spite of the impossibility of arriving at a solution. In black theology, blacks are encouraged to revolt against the structures of white social and political power by affirming blackness, but not because blacks have a chance of winning. What could the concept of winning possibly mean? Blacks do what they do because, and only because, they can do no other. And black theology says simply that such action is in harmony with divine revelation. Black theology as passionate language. Because black theology is survival theology, it must speak with a passion consistent with the depths of the wounds of the oppressed. Theological language is passionate language, the language of commitment, because it is a language which seeks to vindicate the afflicted and condemn the enforcers of evil. Christian theology cannot afford to be an abstract, dispassionate discourse on the nature of God in relation to humankind. Such an analysis has no ethical implications for the contemporary forms of oppression in our society. Theology must take the risk of faith, knowing that it stands on the edge of condemnation by the forces of evil. Paul Tillich calls this an existential risk. Quote, "The risk of faith is an existential risk, a risk in which the meaning and fulfillment of our lives is at stake, and not a theoretical judgment which can be refuted sooner or later." End quote. Blacks know what it means to have their lives at stake, for their lives are at stake every moment of their existence. In the black world, no one takes life for granted. Every moment of being is surrounded with the threat of non-being. If Black theology is to relate itself to this situation, it too must take the risk of faith and speak with a passion in harmony with the revolutionary spirit of the oppressed. The sin of American theology is that it has spoken without passion. It has failed miserably in relating its work to the oppressed in society by refusing to confront the structures of this nation with the evils of racism. When it has tried to speak for the poor, it has been so cool and calm in its analysis of human evil that it implicitly disclosed whose side it was on. Most of the time, American theology has simply remained silent, ignoring the condition of the victims of this racist society. How else can we explain the theological silence during the period of white lynching of Black humanity in this nation? How else can we explain the inability of white religionists to deal relevantly with the new phenomenon of Black consciousness? How else can we explain the problem of white seminaries are having as they seek to respond to radical Black demands? There is really only one answer. American theology is racist. It identifies theology as a dispassionate analysis of the tradition, unrelated to the sufferings of the oppressed. Black theology rejects this approach and views theology as a participation in passion in behalf of the oppressed. Seeking to be Christian theology in an age of societal dehumanization, it contemplates the ultimate possibility of non-being, death in quotes, with the full intention of affirming the ultimate possibility of being, life in quotes. In the struggle for truth in a revolutionary age, there can be no principles of truth, no absolutes, not even God. For we realize that, though the reality of God must be the presupposition of theology, the very name implies this, theos and logos, we cannot speak of God at the expense of the oppressed. Insistence on a passionate theology is a call for an anthropocentric point of departure in theology. I realize that such a call must raise the eyebrows of all who have felt the impact of Karl Barth. But let me state clearly that this approach is not a return to 19th century liberalism with its emphasis on goodness and worth of humanity, which always meant white European humanity. Every Black intellectual is aware that when liberals spoke of inevitable progress and the upward movement of Western culture, it was realized at the expense of Blacks who were enslaved and colonized to secure progress. My concern is altogether different. Though my perspective begins with humanity, it is not humanity in general, but some abstract species of Platonic idealism. I am concerned with concrete humanity, particularly with oppressed humanity. In America, that means Black humanity. This is the point of departure of Black theology because it believes that oppressed humanity is the point of departure of Christ himself. It is this concern that makes theological language a language of passion. My characterization of black theology as passionate theology is analogous to Paul Tillich's analysis of the existential thinker. Quoting Feuerbacher, he writes, "Do not wish to be a philosopher in contrast to being a man. Do not think as a thinker. Think as a living, real being. Think in existence. Love is passion, and only passion is the mark of existence." In fact, Tillich quotes Feuerbach as saying, "Only what is an object of passion really is. The existential thinker is a thinker who not only relates thought to existence, but whose thought arises out of a passionate encounter with existence. As Kierkegaard put it in his definition of truth, an objective uncertainty held fast in the most passionate personal experience is the truth, the highest truth attainable for an existing individual." We thank God for James H. Cone, A Black Theology of Liberation. The only question is, will we as a society side with God, with oppressed people, with those who struggle under white supremacy? That was interesting. As you can see, we really provide a different way of viewing the world. And we feel that's very important in order that we might come up with different ways of making our world more sustainable for you and for me. We thank you for helping us in that regard and would love to hear your thoughts. So please feel free to reach out to us at thoughtsforliving.com. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your week.